My name is Amalia Weber. I'm the program specialist here at Rochester Hills Public Library, and I'd like to welcome you to this evening's program, the Civility Project Workshop. Before we get started, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping details. Firstly, tonight's program will be recorded and available to view about 1 week from tonight on our YouTube page and on the RHPL website shortly after. We ask the audience members please silence or turn off their cell phones before we begin in order to avoid any disturbances during the presentation. Our next program is a concert with the Royal Oak Blues Band, which will be an in-person event on Tuesday, June 25th at 6 p.m. It will be held outside on the West Lawn. This room will be the location in the event of rain or other severe weather. You can sign up for this concert at calendar.rhpl.org. Now, without further ado, please welcome our presenters, Stephen Henderson and Nolan Finley.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here with you tonight. I'm Nolan Finley, and this is my partner, Stephen Henderson.
Nemesis partner,
whatever you want to call it. And we are the founders of the Civility Project. We are also longtime journalists in this town.
That's true.
And longtime friends, very fast friends for 15, 16 years. And we are probably the most unlikely couple you'll ever meet.
That's for sure.
I mean, we agree on very little. Almost nothing of importance. Bourbon,
Other than
right?
bourbon,
Yeah.
right?
You throw something out there, and we are just naturally inclined to fuss and fight about it, to disagree, and that's probably not uncommon with a lot of people. Except what's probably different about us is that we have never let it affect our personal relationship, our friendship. We have developed the ability to, I wouldn't call it agree to disagree. We don't agree.
We don't even agree to disagree.
We agree to fight it out, and we've been doing that a long time. And a few years ago, some people came to us and asked us how we managed to get along so well, given our public and our very public disagreements. I mean,
We need to move. There's a video.
well, that's okay.
It's the way you want it, right? It'll cut my mic off too.
So, some folks come to us and asked us to talk about how we manage to maintain a cordial friendship and a close friendship while being so, taking such opposite positions and public positions, in our roles. We took very different positions publicly on all the major issues, and we were, put together in a lot of formats by organizations, radio and television and groups we were speaking to, and the expectation was that we would fight. And, we've been doing that for quite a while. When somebody asked us, well, how do you manage to fight like that? And I mean, if you've seen us on the TV, it can get ugly, embarrassingly so sometimes. And how you manage to do that and still maintain a friendship, because there's so little of that today. It's become so uncommon for people to forge relationships with others who don't feel as they do politically. And we have managed to do that, and have now turned it into a civility project, this Great Lakes Civility Project, sponsored by Delta Dental Plans of Michigan and Huntington Bank and Ralph Wilson Foundation. We always have to thank our sponsors right up top. We've turned that into this project to talk to groups like this, and we've talked to about 150 groups over the last 4 years about how you can maintain a productive relationship with someone who disagrees with you politically without avoiding the political discussions. And I think that's key. I mean, you can get along with anybody as long as you don't talk about nothing, right? And you know, we take on some very touchy subjects, and you know, that's what we're here to talk to you about. And I always recall a incident or tell a little story to explain sort of the genesis of the project, but also the core of the project. Steve and I were on Mackinac Island in about 2015, I think. We'll just say it was. I can't remember when it was.
I think it was like 12, but that's all right.
Whatever. But we were up there for the Republican Policy Conference. You know, I was back then in pretty good standing with the Republicans, and
Back
you know,
then.
and Steve was
Not.
you know, not, and very uncomfortable for him. But you know, we both up there covering it for our respective papers. He was at the Free Press. I was and still am at the Detroit News. And you know, we were up there working, and we got done with the work, and we decided to go down to from the Grand Hotel down to one of the local bars and, you know, have a drink at the end of the day. We got down there, you know, we're sitting at the bar, enjoying ourselves. And I got up to, you know, use the restroom, and I'm walking across the floor there, and these two women pounced on me. And, you know, that doesn't really happen to me much in the bar. But anyway, these two women pounced on me, and they said, "Is that Steve Henderson you're sitting with?" I said, "Yes." And they said, "Oh, is that your friend?" I said, "Well, yes." And they said, "Oh, how could you be friends with him? He is so awful. We just hate him." And they said it with such emotion, you know, and you know, that it really, those words really struck me, that we just hate him. And I said, "You hate him? Have you ever talked to him? Do you know him?" He said, "Oh, no, we'd never talked to him." And I said, "Well, look, my seat's open at the bar. Why don't you go and sit in my seat and talk to him for a little while?" And so, you know, to their credit, they did. They marched right on over there. I had no idea what he was in for. And so I stood sort of off to the side and was watching this, and it just went on and on and on. I mean, they talked and they talked, and it was, you know, the thing I noticed was that they didn't appear to be confrontational. You know, it appeared to be a rather civil conversation, and it went on and on. And meanwhile, I'm watching the ice melt in my drink, and I finally said, it went on for about an hour and a half, and I said, you know, I walked over and, you know, try to sort of lead them away from Steve and break this up. And as we're leaving, I asked them, I said, "Well, how did it go? What do you think?" And they said, "Oh, he is wonderful. We just love him." And they had went from "we just hate him" to "we just loved him" in an hour and a half. And it occurred to me then, nothing about Steve had changed in those 90 minutes. Nothing about them had changed in those 90 minutes. What had happened was they took the time to talk with each other and actually get to know each other. And it changed everything about their perception of each other.
Yeah. And so kind of from there, we started really thinking about what we do together and why it works, and how we've been able to, as Nolan says, over about 17 years really, maintain a pretty close friendship, but a very bitter political disagreement. Why does that work? And I always like to start with kind of the urgency of those questions right now. So if you think about when Nolan and I met, it was 2007. Right before the beginning of the 2008 political campaigns, we started doing television and radio and live appearances together. And we did it all through that campaign and through that election. And if you think about the outcome of that election, it was the first election of Barack Obama, the country was really divided after that. There were a lot of people who were really upset that Obama had won and really worried about what he might do as president. And there were a lot of people who were really excited about the fact that Obama had been elected. And there was a lot of fighting that was going on. But if you fast forward from that point to 8 years later, to 2016, and think about the outcome of that presidential election, how much more upset people were, if they were upset about Donald Trump being elected, and how much the divide had grown between those people and the people who were supporting him. I remember really clearly that period of time between the election and the holidays, which, in this country, we've got just a few weeks between Election Day and Thanksgiving. I just remember in 2016, the number of people who called or emailed or who stopped me somewhere and said, I don't want to go to Thanksgiving dinner this year. I'm thinking about skipping because Uncle Joe, Aunt Betty, whoever is going to be there, and they voted for the other person. And I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to have that argument anymore. And it was really the first time that I can remember a lot of people telling me that politics and our political disagreements were going to interfere with their family relationships in that way, right? You're going to skip a holiday dinner because of a political disagreement. And so that's 2016. We're getting ready for another political season here and an election this fall. 8 years later, are things better now than they were in 16? They seem worse, right? Things are at the point of feeling like they're coming apart. And so Nolan and I really have not just taken note of that, but also taken note of the contrast in the trend line, right? As things are getting worse for us as Americans, and more of us are unable to even deal with people in our own families who think differently. Nolan and I have been rolling along. I mean, having our arguments and then going off to have dinner and drinks together. And so we've really started to examine what it is that makes that work. What are the things that we've learned over that 17 years? What are the things that we've come to practice consistently with each other that avoid the kind of antipathy and pulling away that we're seeing in other places? And so, we've been doing this for 4 years, and over that 4 years, it seems as though the demand and the interest in the idea of a different way of disagreeing, a better way of disagreeing, has really been growing. And the story that Nolan told is kind of a great foundation for the way that we do these things. Over the last 17 years, we've really come up with 4 pillars of the relationship that the two of us have that we think are the reason that we're able to be civil with each other, to be able to have arguments and not have them be, result in us, clubbing each other to death or something, or walking away. And that story really points to that first pillar, which is dropping assumptions about each other. And I'm going to go really quickly through the 4 pillars, and then we're going to talk in more detail about each of them. But that first one is key. So much of our time is spent right now, I feel like, when we learn that somebody thinks differently than we do, comes from a different place, maybe comes at an issue in a different way, we jump to a lot of conclusions about who they are and what they think. And in that story on Mackinac, we kind of did the opposite. Those 2 women that Nolan was talking about, one of them was part of a family of auto dealers here in Metro Detroit. When this happened, we were in the middle of the auto bankruptcies, and auto dealers were taking real hits during that. I mean, the restructuring that was necessary in the industry meant some of them were going to lose their livelihoods. And I was somebody who was writing pretty passionately about the need for the bankruptcy, the need for the federal government's interference in that bankruptcy to make sure that Detroit was going to survive, right? Can you imagine if GM or Chrysler had actually gone away, what this community would be like? And they had a real issue with that. They said, well, I wasn't thinking about what was happening to dealers. And so we were able to talk about what those differences were. We didn't come to any kind of agreement. I think they still hated my column, at least. But they didn't hate me in the same way because they knew me a little better. And so that's that first step that we ask people to take is dropping the assumptions that we have about each other. The second pillar that we talk about is setting reasonable expectations for the interactions we have with people that we disagree with. We think that there are a lot of unrealistic expectations that we often arrive to disagreements with. We'll talk about what those are, but then we'll talk about what some reasonable expectations really are. The third pillar is listening, and we use that word a little differently, I think, than most of us use it in our everyday lives. In the Civility Project, we'll explain what we mean by listening, and then the fourth is about a commitment to the relationship itself. I say this all the time. In 17 years of arguing with Nolan, I don't think either of us has ever gotten up at the end of the argument and said, you know what, I'm done with this guy. I'm not coming back. I can't do this anymore. I can't stand this. And that doesn't mean we've never ended an argument, with bad feelings or anger with each other. That's absolutely happened. But every time we know in the back of our minds, we'll be back and we'll probably do it again in the next week or so. There's something about that commitment that we think has a lot to do with the ability for us to maintain this, and we think it's something that is missing from lots of other relationships and interaction.
So let's start with assumptions. I mean, our nature is to take a little information about someone and draw all sorts of large conclusions from that information. And a lot of the conclusions that we draw when we find out someone votes this way or supports this political party or is from this, religion or race or whatever, we assign a lot of negative qualities based on that, and we make a lot of assumptions about how we feel about that person, even though we don't, even though you might not know that person. We get that all the time, and people will read one of our columns or hear us on the radio, hear us on the TV. Next day, we get that email. Oh, you're such an idiot. I hate you, you jerk. And, it's over and over. And, you think about it and say, what does that really have to do with me? I mean, but we do that, and we tend to do that now as a nation to a much larger extent. I really believe we are at a coming apart point in this country. We have so assigned such negative, evil qualities to the people who don't agree with us. And we're in the midst of a presidential campaign now where that is going to increase 100-fold. We're already seeing it. I mean, I wrote the other day, I have not seen a single commercial, campaign commercial for any party, any politician, any race, where someone was telling me how great their ideas were, how wonderful, they are and the great things they want to do for us. It's all been, hey, that other guy is scary, and he's a monster, You know, it's all been that division, that us against them mentality. We can't go on like that long, because we truly have come to believe that the half of America that doesn't agree with us is the enemy. And I'm an old guy. I've been around a long time. I don't remember. I was alive during the civil rights movement, during Vietnam, during any number of other times when this nation has had, vast disagreements amongst the people. I never recall it being this dangerously divided, and it is dangerous. I mean, we've seen some awful things that have happened in this country over the last several years, and it's not getting better. And as long as we assume that the other person, the other side, is out to do us harm or do us evil, or that there's something sinister about people because they don't agree with us, it's just going to get worse. And we start with the belief at the Civility Project that all good people come to their opinions in the same way. They take the information, the data available, they run it through the filters of their own experiences and own values, and they come up with an opinion. If that opinion is different than yours, different than mine, it doesn't make them sinister. It doesn't make them evil. It doesn't make them stupid or any of the other qualities we assign. It just means they've had different experiences and hold different values. And the key to coming to a civil relationship with folks on the other side, if you will, is understanding what those values, what those experiences are. And we encourage people, before they engage, if they want to commit to a civil relationship, before they engage in the hard stuff, to first sit down and talk to each other about who you are politically and why. What formed the values that make you put you on this side of the aisle or the other side of the aisle? What were those experiences? And we did that ourselves a long time ago, several years ago.
Yeah, in 2017, an NPR program called StoryCorps came to Detroit. And if you don't know what StoryCorps is, it's kind of a traveling project of NPR. They go city to city in little Winnebago and invite people to come down and bring somebody close to them and have a conversation about the relationship they have. How did the relationship start? Why is it important? Those kind of things. And as soon as they said they were coming to Detroit, I was like, I'm going to go do that. Most people, when they go to StoryCorps, take a spouse or family member. I said, I'm taking Nolan with me.
It was the biggest bait and switch I've ever experienced. We pulled in there, and I saw that Winnebago. I thought, oh.
You thought we were going camping.
Camping.
Or something.
It wasn't.
So I told them before we went in there, I said, here's what we're going to do. Well, here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to go in there and do what we would normally do, which is go in there and have a big argument about something. Instead, we're going to go in there and we're going to tell each other our stories. I want you to tell me what makes you a conservative. What are the experiences you've had? What are the things that you've learned that tell you that that's the right way to solve problems? And then when you're done, I'll do the same thing from the opposite point of view. I'll tell you what makes me a liberal or a progressive or whatever label you want to put on it. Things that I've experienced and done that lead me to believe that that's the right way to solve problems. And so we went in there and we did that. And you get an hour to have this conversation across a table with a mic between you. A couple really important things happened during that conversation. The first thing is that both of us heard things from the other that we hadn't heard before. we learned things about each other that we didn't know. And so this is 2017. We'd already been friends for 10 years and been working together for 10 years. So we knew each other quite well. But there were lots of things about our backgrounds that we had just never bothered to ask about or to volunteer to the other. So we came out of that conversation with a different understanding of why this person who I argue with all the time says these things that make me crazy or make me mad. The other thing that happened during that conversation was that both of us heard things that we found familiar or similar to each other. Things that we shared about our experiences, backgrounds, things we shared about our hopes or our ambitions, things that we wanted from the kind of policy positions that we would advocate for. That was also a surprise. I don't think before that we would have said that we shared an awful lot when it came to politics and policy. This taught us that actually we did. And then, of course, the third thing that happened was that after we had this conversation, we kind of relate to each other very differently. I say a lot that if you went back and looked at arguments that we had on television or someplace before 2017 and then looked at the ones after, I think you could detect a difference. We disagree just as much as we always did, but there's a healthier respect and understanding, I think. Where the other person's coming from, the humanity that's associated with where those ideas come from and why that person believes the things that they do. Do you want to swap these out? It's making noise.
Sorry.
That's an indication you've been talking way too much.
Prefer they just take the mic from me. There we go. And I also think a lot about the timing of that. So we did this 10 years into the relationship between the two of us. How different would the first 10 years of that relationship have been if we had done that first? If rather than getting right to arguing with each other, we had sat down and said, well, where did you get this stuff? Why do you believe these things? Tell me about your background and how you came to these ideas. I think it would have been different, and so we encourage people all the time now to start there. Start with getting a better understanding of the person you're talking to and giving that person a better understanding of who you are. When we started doing this, it was right at the beginning of the pandemic, really, so we couldn't do these in person a whole lot. But the few that we did, we had people pair up with someone they didn't necessarily know well or agree with before we would make the presentation. And they would tell each other their stories. They would get to know each other and go from there, as opposed to going from, hey, I know this person doesn't agree with me, and I'm going to make a bunch of conclusions about what that means.
Yeah, I mean, the filling in the knowledge gaps, and things we had not either thought about talking about or had been reluctant or afraid to talk about or to ask each other about. Filling in those knowledge gaps, led to a greater understanding. I mean, I met Steve, knew him for a number of years, just assumed he'd been dropped on his head as a baby. And that was why he was so off in his opinions. But, as we talked, as I heard, him talk about his personal experiences and the values he was raised with or developed over the course of his maturation, that knowledge led to a greater understanding. When he says something now, I know where it came from, and so where it comes from. But the understanding also leads to respect, and I think once you have a mutual understanding and a respect for each other, it's hard to assign those negative qualities. I know there are reasons, valid reasons, he feels the way he does and advocates for the things he does. His experiences are different from my experiences. And so his thinking is different from my thinking, but it doesn't make him less valid. And I think that's where we need to come to, is to stop seeing the other side as less valid, less worthy of our respect or our time. And once you can come to that place where you understand each other, where you know the things you need to know about where they come from and what they believe and why, it's much easier to engage civilly. But we say the next step is to set reasonable goals for the conversation, and that's the sort of second pillar of this project, is setting reasonable goals, what you hope to accomplish. And we say, another thing we say at the Civility Project is a conversation is not a competition. If your goal in a conversation is to just beat the other person into the table with the superiority of your intellect, don't bother. I mean, that's not going to be fun for you or the other person. If you're out to win, I'm going to talk to this person and I'm going to win this argument. There's no winning. What you'll do, what there is one person, frothing off and the other person shutting down. I walked over, I took a break from work a few years ago in the evening, walked over to the, a bar we both go to, and sat down there and was just, trying to unwind, maybe read the paper. And a guy, a mutual friend, came and sit kitty corner from me at the bar, and he says, "What do you think about this?" And he was pointing to something in the paper. And I offered just a brief little, opinion, because I was really getting paid to give my opinion in that bar. And so, and he pounced. He said, "Oh, bullshit! You're such a blah blah blah." And I'm like, and then he went on for about 5 minutes. And meanwhile, I just shut down. I just shut it off. I wasn't interested at all in anything he had to say, because what he was out to do was to somehow win. And there is no winning. If you're out to convert the other person, forget about that too. I've been working on this guy for years. And if he ever called me and said, "Oh, Nolan, you were right. I agree with everything you said," I would just go on, I think. I believe it would be over for me, because it's not going to happen. And we enter into a discussion with the knowledge that we're not going to convert each other. And you know what? It becomes less important to convert. And conversion is not an honest goal for a interaction. What is an honest goal is to learn something from each other that you didn't know before. To test your opinions against that person's opinions. And we do that with each other all the time. And it sort of sharpens our own arguments, our own viewpoints. There's a benefit in that. There's value in that. There's no value in the shouting at each other. And we do shout at each other. But there is value in learning something you didn't know going in.
Yeah, and this is kind of the point in the presentation where social media kind of makes its first appearance, and social media is, of course, a very strong influence on how we deal with each other. I think it has even far more effect on that than any of us really know. And I gotta admit up front, I am a total social media addict. First thing I do in the morning is grab the phone, take a look at Twitter or Facebook or Instagram and see what people are talking about. It's how I get my news. Last thing I do at night before I go to sleep is grab that phone, and many hours throughout the day I've got it in my hand, to the point where lots of people around me are just very annoyed by how addicted I am to it. I'm fascinated by it. But if you think about the social constructs that are being created on social media platforms, they are kind of antithetical to what we're talking about here. Think about the kind of expectations that people have when they're interacting with people on social media. Think about the ways in which we talk to each other on social media, or watch people talk to one another on social media. This idea of a conversation being a competition is really at the center of a lot of these platforms and the way we behave on them. And I think that has to do with, I think in some ways it has to do with how new these platforms are. I mean, if you think about it, 10 years ago, none of us was really communicating with a lot of people on these things. Now we're, having lots more conversation on them. They haven't figured out what they are yet, or how they're going to function, and the culture hasn't figured out how to use them yet. And so there's nothing wrong with being on those platforms and doing that there, but I think one of the things we're asking people to do is be aware of how different that is from the kind of interpersonal interaction we're talking about. That some of the things that we do on social media don't make any sense in the real world. And when you're dealing with somebody, trying to build a dialogue, an actual dialogue in the real world, this idea of shutting people down, shutting people out, shutting people up, really doesn't work. And so we've got to peel away from that, I think, when we're trying to do this. Not just put the phone down, but put the idea of this kind of real brusque communication away.
And and there's a couple of tips, if you will, for making a conversation work. And I think one of the key rules, if you will, is checking your smugness at the door. Checking that condescension at the door. Don't come into the argument with this, oh, I know everything I need to know, and my job here, or my role here, is just to inform you on what you need to know. I mean, I always start out with the notion that I might be wrong, and sometimes, believe it or not, I am.
Mostly are.
I start out, thinking, maybe I'm wrong about this, and then proceed to prove to myself either I am or I'm not. But start with that open mind and that possibility that you don't know everything you need to know, and that you can learn something here. But the question we always get, it's never failed at one of these presentations, the question we always get is, how do you deal with someone who just won't accept the truth? And I'm like, okay, maybe not with that attitude. Because the late Congressman John Dingell was a dear friend of mine. I spent a lot of time with him, and I was with him one day, and he's getting all these phone calls from environmentalists who were angry at some piece of legislation he sponsored on behalf of the automakers, who were, sort of in his district. But, it was call after call just wearing him out. And he finally, put down the phone, and he put his face in his hands, and he said, they think they're the only ones who talk to God. And we do tend to think that we are the ones who have that direct line, to the truth. And if we've learned anything over the last few years, is that it's sometimes hard to get to the truth. And there's a danger in thinking you have the absolute truth when all the facts aren't in yet. We've seen that over and over. And So, you know, hold out some possibility that you can learn something from a conversation, no matter who it is you're talking to. And, you know, don't, if you hear yourself talking down, if you hear that tone in your voice, you know, stop right there, because, you know, you're going to squander the opportunity to have a meaningful discussion, a positive relationship.
So the third pillar we talk about is listening. You know, once you drop the assumptions, once you set a reasonable expectation for this kind of interaction, you actually have to listen to the person that you're talking with. And I think we use that word just a little differently than many of us use it in our sort of everyday lives. I think if we're asked to define when we're listening, a lot of us would say, well, it's when we're not talking, right? If I'm letting Nolan talk, that means I'm listening. But I think if we interrogate that a little bit, we find that that's actually not 100% accurate. Sometimes when Nolan's talking, I'm not listening to him. I'm thinking about when he stops talking, what am I going to say next? I'm in my head about my next point. Or sometimes I'm judging what he's saying while he's saying it, as opposed to trying to understand exactly what he's saying and why and where it's coming from. Or sometimes I'm just not fully invested in trying to actually listen to what he's saying, trying to really understand those things. We're talking about a much different approach. I think what we're talking about is making that investment in the other person and in their ideas, and saying there is something of value to be gotten from this. There's something of value that I can walk away with from this interaction. And in order to do that, I think I always have two tests for myself, right, to determine whether I'm really listening to somebody. The first is, after they're done talking, could I repeat back to them what they just said? And maybe not word for word or literally, but could I, in good faith, represent what that other person just tried to explain to me about what they think? It's a lot harder to do than it even sounds. You really do have to pay attention to what the other person's saying, and pay attention with the idea of learning in order to do it. And then the second test I have is whether, after they're done talking, do I have questions for them? When I'm really listening to somebody, I actually want to know more about what they're saying. Maybe they said something that I didn't quite catch or understand. Maybe they said something that I didn't expect them to say, and there's an element of surprise there, and I want to know more about why they think that. I think that idea of coming back to somebody with a question rather than a statement is a reflection, even to them, that you're actually listening. Are you doing something with my mic over there?
No.
Higher? All right.
It's a very simple thing, right? I mean,
He's like, you're doing it wrong. Yeah, and so also that interrogative form of our language has another value here. When we ask other people questions, I think it says to them that we are treating them with respect. We are pursuing inquiry with them as opposed to lecturing them. It's a disarming form of communication, right? The sort of idea that, hey, I really do want to know more about you. I want to know more about what you think. I want to hear more from you. I think that kind of signaling is really important when you're talking about an exchange that you want to be an actual exchange, as opposed to sort of a back and forth where you're each trying to get the other just to see it your way.
And the next thing we talk about is sort of not giving up on trying to build a civil relationship, whether it's with someone you disagree with, whether it's an acquaintance or a member of your own family. You stick with it. Stick with this process. I had a cousin after. She's a university professor, and quite on the left side of the political scale. And most of our family isn't. And after Trump was elected, she took. There was all this chatter on the Facebook pages, which, of course, not being on Facebook, I didn't have to worry about. But all this chatter going on, from those who were excited about the outcome of the election. And she wasn't. And so she just cut everybody off from all communication, whether it was on the internet or telephone. She just withdrew because she was so upset and resentful and blamed them for this. And, so that opportunity to discuss the whys of it and why part of her family voted differently than her and part didn't, she lost that opportunity. And Steve said in the beginning, that first Thanksgiving after the 2016 election, where we heard from so many people, well, I'm not going to my sister's this year because my brother-in-law voted for Trump or didn't or whatever. And I remember that that fall, I was back home in Kentucky for the Thanksgiving dinner, and I was sitting there in the house, family just down to supper, and my brother-in-law come bursting in the door, sat down, grabbed a plate, and he said, "Nobody talked to me about Donald Trump. I've already been run out of 2 Thanksgiving dinners, and this is my last chance to get something to eat." I mean, it was so personal, and I don't know if that's eased all that much. I think there's just been more avoidance, and you've got to commit sort of to the process of talking things out than simply being angry with each other because somebody did something that you don't understand. I mean, your responsibility is to try to get that understanding. And part of this, sticking with it, is to keep things in perspective. We were talking up to a nonprofit group in Lansing, I believe it was last spring, and a group about this size, and there was a young woman sitting right here in the front, taking notes the whole time. And after the talk, people came up and talked to us, and she sat there and very patiently waited for the room to clear. And she came up to us, and by that time, she was in tears. And she said, "I have something I want to talk to you. I have a situation, I need help with." And it turns out she was recently married. She's a young woman, recently married. And her husband and his father were so bitterly divided politically, they couldn't even be in the same room with each other, just violently disagreed with each other, and anger. And, it'd come to the point, she said, where they just hate each other. And she said, "I want to start a family, but I don't want to start to have a child in this family where 2 of the people who are supposed to love that child don't love each other, can't stand each other, and have allowed their relationship to dissolve over politics." And it got us thinking about this idea of perspective, keeping things in perspective. I mean, it is important to vote, and it is important to take positions on policy and to advocate for the solutions you believe in. But, you know, I learned long ago that even if I were to convert Steve to my way of thinking, the world's not going to change. I mean, we're not going to get lower taxes just because Steve said, oh, yeah, no, I think we ought to cut taxes, you know? And likewise, we are not going to get more outrageous spending just because he said, Nolan, we ought to open up the checkbooks. Keep it in perspective. You are not, to quote George W., you are not the deciders here. I mean, you can you can influence the deciders, you can vote, and you can decide who the people in power are going to be, but it doesn't really change a thing if you manage to convince somebody who disagrees with you to come to your side of the argument. I mean, what's more important, that somebody think exactly like you think, or that somebody's going to be there when everything falls apart in the middle of the night? And, you know, I have a brother-in-law who's, you know, just nutball conspiracy theorist. I hope nobody in the room knows him and passes along that I said that, because that has happened to me. I was speaking, I'll just diverge a second here. I was speaking to a group of, this women's group, and I can't remember who it was, but it's a rather large group, and I was telling a story about a colleague of mine who was, he lived in the cast quarter. He was a bit of a character, and he married a hooker. And so he didn't trust her when he came. He worked the night shift and afternoon shift, and he didn't trust her to leave her alone while he came to work. So he started bringing her to work with him. And for about 6 months, we had this very flamboyant hooker sitting in our office.
The newsroom used to be a very, very interesting place.
And so
it is less so today.
I told that story, and everybody had a good laugh. And this woman come up to me afterwards and says, "Oh, that guy you were talking about, was that Uncle Pete?" And I'm like, my Uncle Pete worked at the news, and his wife, Gloria, we always suspected there was something funny. I'm like, oh. I mean, what's the odds? And so anyway, what the hell was I saying before we got there? I just like to tell that story. But, anyway, I mean, my brother, and so he's on this crazy stuff, stuff he sends out on the internet, just wear you out. I mean, one after another of, these guys in the, are putting stuff in our water, and they're and so my kids have all blocked him from Facebook, and sort of blocked him from their lives. I said, okay, he's an oddball when it comes to his fanaticism on politics, but he can fix anything. And so when your plumbing breaks, you're going to need him. He's also got a tremendous heart, and when you need that kind of support, he's going to be there. So maybe you can look past the craziness and not engage on every single thing he sends you on the internet, and this might work out for everybody a whole lot better than saying, "Oh, that's it, I'm cutting you off." And we can say, and I think Steve mentioned it at the beginning, we have never cut each other off because of a disagreement, and no matter how serious. And we've argued about things most Americans are afraid to talk about. We talked about race, and and all those other touchy issues, and we've hurt each other's feelings, I'm sure. But we've never stopped. And one thing we've also never done, and I think it's key here, we've never made it personal. We have never looked at each other and said, "You're a blank." We just don't do that. And we would advise any relationship that you make that sort of, well, whether it's your marriage or your relationships at work, that you make that a personal rule, that you're not going to do that, because people will forgive the things you do a lot quicker than the things you say, and those are deeper hurts.
And this is another place where the culture of social media really is teaching us something different than what we're trying to do. If you think about the very structure of social media, it is designed to allow us to create these communities where there is just one way of thinking, right? And you push anybody who's even slightly different out of it. All of the tools of social media tell us that this is the way we should engage. I can block somebody. I can mute somebody. I can unfriend somebody. And of course you can't just, it's not good enough just to do it. You have to do it and then tell everybody else that you did it, right? I blocked that person. I'm never going to talk to them again. And everybody cheers. That's having an effect, I think, on the culture outside of social media. It's teaching us that it's okay to push people away and not engage with them, not be committed to the idea that there's value in knowing people and interacting with people who see things differently than you do. And again, it's not that you can't be on social media. I'm on it all day, but there's a consciousness that I think we have to have about the difference between what we're doing there and what we want to do in our politics and in our personal lives.
And so, I think that brings us to the end of our formal presentation, and we like to leave time for questions. And I think
There's a mic for questions.
I think there's a mic back here. Just put your hand up, and Amalia will find you, and we'll do our best to answer your questions.
What's your process for sorting out alternate facts?
You mean between the two of us?
Yeah, one person thinks one
Well,
way, one person thinks the other, and you're looking maybe at the same basis of facts.
Yeah,
but
and then, there's facts and there's opinion, and of course you base hopefully your opinions on facts, and everybody does tend to interpret facts in a different way based on their experiences and their values and what they want to see, what they want the facts to be. But we're in a period now where misinformation and the ability to shape and reshape facts is enormous, and I think it's an enormous threat to who we are as a people, because now you can't even believe everything you see, and the ability to manipulate images and speech and what have you is becoming so sophisticated. We've both seen presentations on how this works, and it's chilling, and it's just now starting. I mean, we are just now on that first step of artificial intelligence, and it is going to be much more difficult to figure out what's true and what's not true. And it is going to be on each one of us to do a lot more work to get to the bottom of things, to get a wide net of information to work through and sort through to figure out what's really true and what's not.
I mean, Nolan's absolutely right about the
Say that again slow.
about the breadth and the depth of misinformation and the threat of it. I mean, it is an incredibly dangerous dynamic that's been introduced to the kind of political dialogue. And you've got to be really careful about not indulging it, not repeating it, that kind of thing.
But I think what you're asking more about is people who just believe differently about the same set of truth. So look, we just had an example of it not long ago when Nolan gave the example of trying to convince me, for instance, that we should have lower taxes. And then what he said was, what I would want to convince him of is that we should have more outrageous spending, right? That's kind of funny.
That's
not
true.
Funny. But, you know, I believe that tax cuts are spending. They are, right? Tax cuts are spending. And Republicans have been masters at saying, you know, no, tax cuts is just giving you your money back. That's not actual spending, but of course it blows a huge hole in the deficit. Most of the debt that we've run up is because of tax cuts, those kind of things. That's how I see it. Now, if I were to sit here and try to convince Nolan or fight with him about those definitions, we would never get anywhere, right? I mean, both of us believe something that the other is never going to be able to see. So if we're going to talk to each other, we kind of have to agree that, that's a difference that is unresolvable between the two of us. And there's no point in spending hours and hours trying to get Nolan to say tax cuts are spending, or to get me to say that spending is just on programs or social programs or whatever. I think we got to give each other a little more leeway to be able to have those kind of dialogues. There are real differences between us about how we define things, about how we see things, and about how we interpret things, and they have become the sort of central obsession of our differences, as opposed to talking more substantively about what we want or what we don't want.
I'm looking forward to Thursday and the presidential debate if it comes off. I mean,
Probably the only one looking forward to that.
because and it will be very important, I think, for everybody to go in with a healthy dose of skeptical, because I don't know that we've ever seen two bigger liars on a stage together than these two. I mean, they
Richard
cannot
Nixon.
they cannot tell the truth about their own history. I mean, let alone what they've done and what they intend to do. So, and I think it's going to be increasingly that way in our political environment. One of the things that the incivility that has sort of gripped the nation has done is it's driven good people out of the political realm. I mean, it is our best and brightest are no longer choosing politics as a profession, as a life's work. We've tolerated. I mean, it always comes back. It's our fault, because we've tolerated the sort of and responded to the sort of ugliness that is infecting our politics, and nobody in a right mind would want to jump in and engage in that. It's just not that attractive a profession anymore, and so now look where it's brought us. I mean, I can go on and on about the sorriness of our political choices this time, but it's what we've accepted. Another question?
Hi. Relationships are important, but how do you reckon with the fact that, Nolan, you're attached to a certain set of beliefs, core principles, ideology, and so is Steve, and those ideologies are in turn attached to increasingly sort of radical definitions of what that means. So we're no longer talking in terms of policy differences like marginal tax rates or the right way to end the Vietnam War. We're talking about entirely different ways of life and entirely different ways of seeing the world, which is why we're so divided. In your personal relationship, and then advice to everyone else, how do we deal with that fact that it's really different than even when you started this thing 10 years ago?
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's worse. And, I think that's what we're trying to do here, is get people out of their bunkers where they only talk to each other and they reinforce the sort of things you're talking about, this separateness and this, increasingly distant views of the way we should live and operate. I mean, what we're trying to do is bring people back to a place where they can have meaningful discussions with each other so that they come back towards the middle, that everything is not out there on the extremes. Because if you're only talking to others who hold the same beliefs you do, you're just going to not just reinforce those, but keep, sort of building on them and becoming more and more extreme in the views.
I mean, you're right that the politics at this point seem to be leading us in that direction, and the politicians seem to be leading us in that direction. And I think all the time about the things that used to be kind of commonplace in politics that just don't exist anymore. I remember really distinctly when Barack Obama was running for the Senate in Illinois. I happened to have to go to a campaign appearance that he was having and cover it in southern Illinois, in farm country, which is notoriously red. I mean, Democrats don't do well in those places. But here was this young, black guy from Chicago standing in this barn in front of all these farmers, making the case that his approach to governing was going to help them. That even though he wasn't like them and didn't have their experiences, that he had ideas that he thought could help them. I can't think of a Senate candidate in this state or in any other who's doing that kind of trying to convince anymore, right? Trying to say, we are different, but I have ideas that could help you, and you probably have ideas that could help me. The campaigns that we'll see now are about getting your people to the polls, right? Getting as many of your folks out as possible. It's not about trying to convince other people. I spent 5 terms covering the U.S. Supreme Court in Washington, and that's now 20 years ago. The two kind of polar opposite justices back then were Antonin Scalia and Ruth Ginsburg, both of whom, by the way, were confirmed with no votes, right? 96-0 in favor by senates that were divided, but also there were no two closer friends in Washington or anywhere else than the two of them, right? They understood that this is politics and this is law and this is the Constitution, and we see it differently, but that's not how we define ourselves. I know for a fact that on the court today, that does not exist. There isn't that same sensibility, and Nolan's right that, look, we're responsible for demanding that be different, but it's almost like we've started a cycle that's really hard to interrupt. Is it that we interrupt it and push things in another don't, or is there some leader who interrupts it and does it? I guess I don't know the answer.
One thing I would say is that when we stop talking about process and start talking about outcomes, we come to a lot quicker agreement. We share a lot more in common. We want the same things, and I think most of us want the same things. We want a more prosperous country. We want a more equitable society. We want safer communities. We want a better life for our children. On and on, you name any issue, and when we look at the end game, we're pretty close to what we want to see happen. And once you realize that you want to get to the same place, it smooths out a little bit of the process, some of the disagreements over how to get there. It creates more of a shared mission. But one of the things, I mean, Steve talked a lot about social media as a root cause of the incivility we see today. I also think hyper-partisanship is a root cause. It's become, for too many people, more important that their party win than that we do the right things for the country. And I am almost to the point where I think it's healthier not to attach yourself to a political party. And because increasingly, I think we are at the point now where all that matters to these parties is to win, to hold their party or power, maintain their power, and making good decisions about the future of our country is less important than holding on to their seats. And I think it's that is getting worse.
Wondering, I remember being younger and watching television Sunday mornings, and there would always be a liberal here, a Carl Rowan, James Kilpatrick, and they would have a moderator, and you would get to the end of the show and you'd say, okay, neither of them are crazy, but I agree with that one more, but you'd kind of have that going on. And I've heard about the fairness doctrine being taken away by the FTC, and then things became more one-sided on television shows. And I was wondering, when you two got together, I'm assuming you got good ratings. I don't know, but I mean, is that? This was after that.
We were mostly on public television. Nobody cares about the rate.
But it seems like that's the type of show that would really do more healing than anything else. Yet I think your points that you've just been talking about is that it is so divided what we're watching, and also with gerrymandering getting more and more scientific. We're all in our own bubbles, it seems
Well,
like.
I mean, that is a good point, because a lot of this, has become worse as we've become polarized in our news sources, and the rise of cable television programs and all talk radio. They feed on audiences that are like-minded, that come to them only to have their opinions affirmed, rather than to be challenged or to learn or to hear a variety of voices. And if you think about our information sources today, it's much fewer of them give you that sort of balance that you talked about. And that was once the norm. And so I think that's contributed greatly to the problem.
We didn't talk much about this in the presentation, but normally we do that. Cable TV is an accelerator of exactly what we're talking about in terms of incivility, and I think we tend to think of it in terms of political divides, but really it's just about money. It's about viewers and advertisers, so that they can make the margins that they want, and there isn't much difference really between the two political poles there in terms of how they do it. I mean, I always say that the telltale about cable news and what it's after is the fact that any time of day, any day of the week, if you turn it on, the lower third, as we call it, which is the little banner that runs across the bottom, is going to say breaking news, right? Now, is that possible? Really? Is it breaking news all the time? It can't be, but that gives you the sense that, oh, something really important is happening here, and I got to pay attention to that. That's a manipulation of information. It's not just a presentation of it. And then if you think about the way that they but they organize the panels that they have, and everything is now a panel on CNN. I don't understand how we got from them telling me the news all day to them having other people tell me what they think about the news all day. But if you think about who's on these panels and the extreme gulf between the two of them, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It leaves you with the idea that there is no solution, right? That the two sides are so far apart that you couldn't possibly come up with something that would keep everyone happy. And again, that's designed to have you uneasy about things, so that you keep coming back to try to figure out what's happening. I mean, I don't know whether it's the disappearance of the fairness doctrine so much as it is, just the model for the business model for media has changed so much that kind of information that you're looking for it's just not a priority.
And that goes back to Dale's question a bit too. Don't forget that there are a lot of institutions, a lot of people who profit off our division and keeping us frightened of each other. There is no money to be made in the middle anymore. So, whether it's social media, whether it's cable TV, whether it's politicians looking for your vote, division, is their stock and trade, keeping you, listen to the messages. Everybody's trying to scare you to death of the other side. And so, we have lost a lot, not all, but we've lost a lot of our moderate politicians particularly in this state. Fred Upton's gone, Peter Meyer's gone. You go back over the last 20 years and see moderates just disappearing from the political scene.
I have seen both of you discussing on TV many times.
Oh.
So you hurt each other's feelings and discuss and go home, and then again meet again. Suppose you have a series of heated discussion, then after a while, how do you patch up, or what common ground do you have to carry on?
We don't take it personally. I don't know that we've ever come back and said, well, you said that last week. I think we just forget about it and go on.
And it's also that
do you have like vacation together or something? Like, do you talk on Sundays?
Let's put it into that rubric right now.
Yeah, we do not.
We do not vacation together, but we do spend a lot of social time together. We get out of here in a few minutes. We'll probably
go get a drink or something.
But
some of it is also though. I usually will talk about how in the beginning we didn't have a choice but to argue with each other. It was our jobs, and people were paying us to show up and have these arguments. So you had to come back if you wanted to get your check. But over time, I do think that it's evolved more to us.
Fun.
Yeah, right. It's fun, and we get value out of it. We both get real value out of talking to the other, even when we're angry or our feelings are hurt. And look, there's sometimes when we got to say, okay, there's no more productive time to spend doing this, right? Not right now. Like we're having an argument, we can't see anything to agree on, and so let's just stop and move on. We'll come back to this some other time. I think that's okay too, to recognize when you've reached the practical end of a particular debate. But again, it's this idea that you will come back and re-engage, at some point. And I just think I think both of us understand that we'll always do that, and so you don't take it as personally. You try not to be as personal in what you say to the other person.
Okay, we've kind of talked about the people, the quality of the people in government isn't as good as it used to be. People tend to put parties ahead of the nation. It hasn't really been a very cheerful type about things. There's looks like it's getting worse. What gives you hope that things will get better?
Well, I mean, these sessions give us hope because over and over, wherever we go, we see and hear from people who recognize that things aren't right and want them to be better and are looking for an opportunity to help make them better. The response has been tremendous. I mean, we don't have people coming here and fighting with each other, and we do often speak to groups who are mixed in their viewpoints and publicly mixed in their viewpoints, and their ability to sort of make this work is encouraging.
And look, I mean, I don't think we've got the best crop of people in politics right now, and that's a problem. But that doesn't mean that they're all awful. And I can think of there's absolutely people who are going to be on the ballot this fall in this state, in this part of the state, who I am really excited to go vote for. People who I think absolutely belong in government and politics, people who avoid a lot of the things that we've been talking about tonight. I think, like Nolan said, there's a real appetite for people like that, and when they show up and when they present themselves, there's some enthusiasm for them. The country's been through cycles like this many times. Now, I do think this is worse than some of the others, but historically, this has been a struggle to keep the Union together for almost 250 years now. There have been times when it has felt like maybe it's not going to make it, and it always bounces back. It always figures out a way to survive. I mean, there is value in the idea that this is now the longest surviving republic on the planet. Think about that. Think of all the things that have come and gone since this country was founded. And this country's got a lot of problems and had some in the beginning that still aren't solved. But there's a reason that it persists, I think. And I think ultimately we'll come out of this with something much better than where we were before. It's just going to be a rough time while we endure all of this kind of nonsense.
It's going to take an intentional approach. I don't think it's just going to happen. I think as a people, we have to commit to toning down that hate. We don't all have to agree with each other. It is not necessary for everybody in this country to feel the same way. In fact, that would be a very unhealthy environment. That tension and disagreement is necessary for a republic to thrive and survive. It's the hatred we've got to deal with, or I don't think we're going to pull through this. I think there's too many challenges to it. And now, in the past, we were a far more homogenous society, and now we're not. I mean, we've got a far more diverse society, and we're going to have to learn to talk to each other across perhaps different divides. But the hatred has to come to an end, and this default to hatred of people who don't think like you, we've got to get past that.
Like 1 to 2 more. I have one over here, and then there's one on that side. Okay.
I was just wondering, is it possible to get an outline of your 4 pillars that you talked about?
It's funny you should ask.
Stuff we're fighting about.
We have a book about ready to go to the publisher. If Steve would ever get his part of it done. Wayne State's going to publish a book on our Civility Project hopefully in the spring of next year. So
But there's also a website. If you go to, I think it's greatlakescivility.org or something like
it's
that.
the greatlakescivilityproject.com.
.com. See, there you go. There's all kinds of information there about what we do and how we do it, and the pillars are there too. But they'll be in the book next spring. Next spring. See, I said that. I'll get it done.
That was quick. We got 2 more.
Thank you. This has been a great evening. I have a question about, it looks like in this room, we're all kind of in the same bucket age-wise, and I'm wondering, are you reaching the younger people? And the second part of that question is, I'll bet a lot of people in the room remember being taught critical thinking. And I'm hoping that they're teaching critical thinking so that, we were taught when you read an article, you looked at who the author was. What was the background of the author? Where did they go to school? Did they go to school? We were to think critically. And when I look at, some cable, no matter what side, conservative or liberal, I wonder about the audience. And are they able to see through the drama and the acting and be able to think critically like we were taught at one time?
I think 2 things on that. One, I think the younger people are much more open to this. They were raised in a different environment, and in put there more we were in terms of the diversity of their community and what have you. They're more inclined to this. One thing I worry about with young people is this idea that they can't speak. This fear of expressing themselves and sharing their opinion. This whole cancel culture that they've created a very unhealthy environment for the exchange of ideas. And we've seen, we've done this on college campuses, and we've seen sort of this idea of people, of young kids, of students, not what they can say and what they can't say. I think there's starting to be a growing awareness. I know at Oakland University, Ora Peskovitz is very committed to this idea of creating not just a civil campus, but a campus where people can civically engage without fear. And I think that's one thing we didn't mention and should have, is that up front, when you have these engagements, there's got to be a commitment to it's okay to say what you think. And if you say something that goes beyond sort of the established boundaries, that we're not going to pounce on you, we're not going to jump on you, we're going to talk with you. But I'm not sure that sort of dialogue is encouraged in our schools as much as it should be.
I mean, one of the things I think is true with young people is that, of course, they've grown up in a really different time than we did, but already there are some signs that I think they are, from a political standpoint, a little healthier than the generations that came before them. They have strong political identity, but they resist party ID in some very important ways. They are much more accepting of difference because they grew up with it than older generations tend to be. I think their politics are going to be really interesting once they really start to engage, right? I mean, it takes a while. Just because you're eligible to vote doesn't mean that you're really doing it yet or all that active. I think when we see them kind of start to take over politics and dialogue, I think we'll be in a better place than we are right now.
Not those Bernie bros, though.
You don't like them?
Thank you all. We appreciate you coming out. Oh.
We have one more over here.
One more question.
Just quickly, so if everybody is actually holding their noses on the way to the polls to vote for either Biden or Trump
Or not.
or not, how did that happen? Why did no labels not take hold?
I wish
Why was there not some kind of moderate surge?
Well, that's my great disappointment of this election. And Dale's daughter is Caitlin Buss, my colleague on the editorial page, and we worked about as hard as we could to promote this idea of a third choice, and it didn't happen. The partisan identities and the loyalty are so strong, and the punishment for breaking away from the party or for betraying the party, if you will, are so harsh. Nobody was willing to take a risk. It would have meant running with a strong possibility that you weren't going to win, although I thought this year there was a greater chance than we've ever had. And then saying goodbye to your political career. Nobody was willing to take that risk. I thought Nikki Haley would have been a perfect no labels candidate because she came in with a base and a willingness to kind of embrace the middle. I think I just can't believe the American people will accept these sort of choices long term. I got to believe they're going to rally and either break one of these parties or form a new one. But yeah, no labels to me offered me the chance of actually voting for a president for the first time in 3 cycles. And I think there's a lot of people in that boat. I'm not sure everybody's going to hold their nose and pick one of these abysmal candidates. I think, there's a third of really the people on the right who are just, out of their minds, enthusiastic about their candidate, and a third on the left, and that leaves a whole lot of people who would like something different. I think the number was 70, almost 3/4 of voters said, give me another choice. Now, why, if that were a business, if politics were a business, and the business heard their customers saying that, they'd give them another choice. But these two parties are so arrogant and so much in control of the process and the structure of our politics that, they said, take it or leave it. And that's basically what they said to us this year. Take it or leave it. This is the best we can do.
I do think we're at kind of an inflection point in terms of the two-party system that we've had now for more than 150 years with the two parties that we have. I don't think these will be the two parties that dominate politics 20 years from now. And this is what happens in that transition. If you look historically at what's happened when a party goes away and another emerges, you get a couple of elections where the old guard is still there, and that's what choice people end up with. The last time we really had a significant shift was before the Civil War, when the Republican Party replaced a terrible Whig Party that was totally out of touch with what was going on in the country at the time. We're kind of in the same place, right? Right now, politically, where I think, and I do think it's the Republican Party that's coming apart at the seams and will be replaced by something kind of center-right that will be more appealing to mainstream Republicans. You don't have the same problem on the Democratic side, except at the top of the ticket this time, where people are upset with Biden. But if you look at what's going on in the Senate races and the House and state houses, Democrats, for the most part, feel pretty good about the way things are going. They don't like Joe Biden because he's got limitations and things like that. They're not in love with, really, the reason that Joe Biden is the candidate is Nolan's in love with Kamala Harris, right? I'm convinced that Joe Biden would never have agreed to run for a second term if he thought Harris could win, and I don't think she can. This is a total aside. I have been pushing this theory for a while that the president doesn't actually intend to run in the fall, but that he's holding the spot to avoid a really bloody primary that would have sunk the party, and that at the convention he'll decline the nomination and open it up to the floor where you would see probably Gavin Newsom and somebody we know really well, Gretchen Whitmer, emerge as the likely candidates. Now, is that going to happen? I have no idea, but there's a lot that points. Certainly, Newsom and Whitmer are behaving as though they're candidates. If you watch what they say and what they do, they certainly have some inkling about what's going on.
But, I do think we're probably cultivating an environment where a third party could thrive, because there is no ideological diversity within these two parties. And so, there's no room for people who don't toe this narrow line in either Republicans, in either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. There's a set of ideas that you have to swear allegiance to, or you're not welcome at the table. And I get these folks all the time who say, "Oh, you're a rhino," Republican in name only. I say, I'm not a Republican at all. I said, I'm not joining your stinking party because there's no tolerance for divergence of thought. And on the Democratic side, I believe, is in the same position. I mean, there was a time when I first started covering politics, there were conservative Democrats and liberal Republicans. You can name
Don't really
them,
exist anymore,
and
right?
that doesn't exist.
Or when they exist, they get chewed up. I mean, Peter Meyer is a great example of that. I mean, I don't agree with him on many things, but I mean, I see that he's a much more acceptable candidate than far right, and he got clobbered for being moderate.
And so there's not. I don't think there's enough people who live on those extremes to sustain the two parties that demand allegiance to extreme ideologies. So I do think there'll be a middle party forming where that is accepting of ideas, a broader set of ideas and more internal debate.
But the more likely outcome is that one party morphs into that other, and then
I don't
that
think
enforces a discipline on the other that changes it as well. I don't think you see both parties go away.
I'm not saying both parties will go away. I don't believe either one will. I think there'll be a centrist party.
Just change.
I think there'll be a third party, because if one party or the other
Never
or both,
happened in our history.
we have never been in this place before.
Sure we have.
No, we haven't. We have never had two candidates as sorry as these two in our whole history.
1856.
You'll,
The last really Democrat versus Whig election. It was just
the two candidates weren't as hated universally as these two are.
They were as bad.
They might have been as bad, but they weren't as hated. I mean,
I think the third party comes out of one of the parties, but it is a.
well, then you
different
still got a whole group of people you're leaving behind.
Yeah.
So, anyway, thank you all.